I reckon the federal government may be shut down, but municipal elections are just heating up. Welcome back to the I Reckon podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Jess Tandler, the co-host of the I Reckon podcast, owner and founder of Tandler's Tallow, and we are in Tandler's Tallow HQ today, shooting the first pre-launch mini episode in the shop. There's a lot more echo in here. The lighting's different. The setup's different. I got to get ready. I told you I'm not going to waste my dad's time. Next Friday, I need to be tight. Need to be ready to go. So we're going to talk about a few things today. No clips today. I've just been busy. I haven't been scrolling very much, so I haven't found any good reels or anything like that. But a few things I do want to get into. A little bit on the shutdown, kind of where the debate's going with that. I've seen some stuff that I like in the political sphere on both the Democrat side and the Republican side. So I do want to talk about what I've seen that I think is really positive this week. And then we're going to talk about municipal elections. Getting into it. Shutdown day 17, 2 days into the second pay period for the United States military. On the ticket right now, Affordable Care Act tax credits, which are set to expire December 31st, as well as SNAP benefits set to expire November 1st. So SNAP's kind of the 50-meter target, and then SNAP and pay for the military, and then looking further out at the end of the year with the ACA tax credits. And if these tax credits aren't renewed, the Democrats have found an example of a couple in Idaho whose premiums are going to go from $51 to $2,200. And that's what Affordable Care Act health insurance looks like without subsidies. So we're going to assume that this couple in Idaho is real, that what they're saying is true. And when I heard subsidies, I was like, okay, so are we subsidizing the Affordable Care Act to make it look like it's working? So I did some digging, and the answer is no. The Affordable Care Act is a three-legged bar stool. There's three legs. Guaranteed coverage, so all the pre-existing conditions, elderly, everybody's guaranteed coverage. Individual mandate is the second leg, and subsidies is the third leg. So the argument from the Democrats is that if you cut the subsidies, the stool's going to fall over. It's not going to be very stable. People's premiums are going to go up. Interesting argument because the individual mandate was zeroed out in 2019. So one of the legs is already gone. So I don't know, it was pitched to us as a three-legged bar stool. I don't know if it actually is. I think the big flaw with the Affordable Care Act is that it addressed coverage. It did not address cost. Subsidies is basically a blank check, and it causes the insurance to chase costs. The insurance itself is not putting downward pressure on the cost of healthcare, much like when the federal government started kind of guaranteeing and in its own way subsidizing student loans. We saw the cost of college tuition just absolutely skyrocket because you got all these kids walking around with blank checks. You know what I mean? And now you got universities with like a 4-story rock wall, 2-story gym, 4 Olympic pools. Has nothing to do with your, gender studies or chemical engineering degree. But it has a lot to do with trying to hoover up more of those blank checks from these students by having the funnest college to be at. So it just creates all sorts of problems when the government tries to step in and control something. Look, the people in the private sector are smart. Entrepreneurs are smart. Business owners are smart. Finance pros are smart. They will figure out a way to take advantage of the government. So what you have is, taxpayers are paying a bunch of money in taxes that gets used as subsidies that goes to the insurance company. And on the other hand, they're still paying their premiums. The insurance company has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders to continue to increase the stock price. The government doesn't necessarily have the same fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers and won't necessarily provide the most efficient system. So, what I wonder is, we've socialized the fire department, and when the fire department comes in to put out a fire, the house that's burning, you're not going to save a lot of stuff in that house. But they come in and put the fire out anyway because you don't want the neighbors' houses burning down. The neighbors don't want their houses burning down, right? And so we as a society got together and we're like, we all have a dog in this fight. Let's just go ahead and socialize the the fire department because we don't want, a fire could be going on in a poor person's house, 8 miles away, but really quickly that fire can spread to the affluent neighborhood. So, that's what we did. We did that a long time ago before, people's pensions were tied up in the firefighting industry. But that being said, that's the most obvious example of a system that we've socialized as a society that is incredibly efficient and does, for the most part, does very well, as long as they have water. Looking at you, California. So maybe that's what we do. Maybe that's the answer. But in the meantime, it's going to hurt some people. My position is anything but the status quo. Like, I understand it's going to be painful. It is painful already for a lot of people. The Affordable Care Act, getting to keep your doctor, or like, I think that ended up being a lie, but like people who want to maintain like privatized health insurance, it's because they want to pick their doctor. I'm going to be totally honest. I come to the table with absolutely like, I do not care about getting to pick my doctor. That's because I've been on TRICARE my entire life because my parents were in the military. I was in the military. Now my husband is still in the military. So I've been on TRICARE since the day I was born. Okay. I was born on TRICARE. I had a baby on TRICARE. I've done it all. So I've never gotten to pick my doctor. Anytime I go to the pediatrician, my son's pediatrician appointments, it's a different doctor. And that's just all that I know. So when people throw a fit about not being able to pick your doctor, I'm like, man, we've never been able to pick our doctor and like, we're fine. So, but some people feel really passionately about that. And there's a good argument for like why that's super important. I don't address it because I've got absolutely no context. The fear of not subsidizing the Affordable Care Act is that the lack of subsidies is going to cause premiums to go up. We mentioned our couple in Idaho, okay? When the premiums go up, young, healthy people who pay into the system more than they take from the system, there is an assumption that those people will leave. And then the only people left on the Affordable Care Act are basically sick, elderly people whose jobs don't offer health care. And then it becomes even more expensive. And those costs aren't passed on to healthier customers. They're passed on to the taxpayers writ large. And I think that gets us a lot closer to socialized medicine than maybe we think. But, we already kicked one leg out of the bar stool. We already removed the individual mandate in 2019. And while some young, healthy people walked away from the Affordable Care Act, it didn't happen en masse like everyone was saying. So I think that's a faulty assumption that's just used to kind of fearmonger in order to keep the status quo going. If you're United Health, 75% of your revenue is coming from Affordable Care Act subsidies, or from maybe not just those subsidies, but from tax dollars. And then, you're using the rest, you're getting the rest from, people who you say like, no, you're actually not getting that surgery. Like, good luck, whatever. So if you're United Healthcare, like, of course you don't want this to change. Where's that money going to come from? Like, the American family is not just going to come up with more money. You know what I mean? And I think, we could have ice in our veins and go fully private and be like, if you don't pay for healthcare, you don't get healthcare. If you want to pay after you receive the care, you're going to actually have to pay up. Like, there's going to be no government assistance that's going to come and help you. We can do that. I think, you'll have a lot of people dying on the street, which does not play to the aesthetic that we want our country to have. Like, we got the greatest country in the world, the biggest economy in the world. Like, I don't really want to see people, dying on the street while I'm trying to get coffee. Point blank. So, and then we can do the status quo, which is like 1 foot in, 1 foot out of like private and socialized medicine. That's not working. And then, so I think the only other option is to go fully socialized medicine, treat it like the fire department, because you can't be a smart consumer of your neighbor's healthcare. Just like you can't be you can control whether your house catches fire for the most part. You can't really control if the neighbor down the street's house catches fire, but you end up paying when that happens. So, if we all share the cost. I don't know. I'm usually like a strong capitalism person. I just don't really believe in healthcare as an industry. I don't think that's an industry. I think it's a system. But whatever. I think I'm in favor of the shutdown continuing over this because the status quo is not going to work. So whatever they can change, even if it's a small change and we open the government back up, good by me. You know what I mean? And then so that's what I don't like is half privatized, half socialized medicine. What I do like, starting on the Democrat side, Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, he's a House representative, I believe, rejected APAC funding and has vowed to refuse any additional APAC funding in the future. I love it. I love it. Why? Not a huge fan of the modern state of Israel. But, there's a lot of countries that I'm not fans of that have a vested interest in getting the United States to do what it wants. And then maybe they send a lobbyist or a think tank or something else our way to kind of help shape American policy in a way that benefits their national interests. I got no problem with that. I don't blame them. They should register under FARA. So if APAC registers under FARA, just like any other like foreign service organization or agency, okay, cool, don't care. I just don't like that there's an exception. So until the exception is done away with, I want to see more politicians not take any of their money. And I think that's the only way we get it to change. So good for that guy. Keep it up. Moving over to Oklahoma. We've done Idaho. We've done Massachusetts. Come with me. We're in Oklahoma now. 6,000 students at the University of Oklahoma attended a TPUSA event honoring Charlie Kirk. I'll be honest, I didn't even know 6,000 students went to University of Oklahoma. I mean, that's astonishing. Oh my God, speaking of colleges. Happy Friday to everybody except the United States Air Force Academy. Holy shit. I'm going to read this to you. So Donald Trump, I talked about this yesterday. Donald Trump is a builder, first and foremost. This is what he knows. This is what he understands. He sent out a post on Truth Social. I'll read it to you here. The United States Air Force Academy Cadet Chapel has been a construction disaster from the time it was built in 1962. The earlier stories that it leaked on day one, and that was the good part. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent. The renovation, which essentially has been going on since the day it was built, is now projected to go on until 2028, costing an additional $90 million, bringing the grand total to $355 million. This mess should be investigated. Very unfair to the cadets. A complete architectural catastrophe. The United States Air Force once again proving that if you want something done right, just call the Army. For context, the Cadet Chapel at the United States Military Academy at West Point, built in 1910, I believe, underwent its first round of renovations a century later. So, maybe we just don't build things like we used to. I don't know what it is, but holy shit. And you know what? He took a swipe at the Air Force Academy at this building, but you have to understand how Donald Trump thinks. He's a builder, okay? He's a doer. He understands these things and he can get in there. He doesn't need a staffer to be like, yeah, this is kind of messed up, but there's some nuance here. No, he knows that this is BS. And what he's doing is sending a message, I think, to any other federal contract worker, anybody doing a federal project, tighten up. That's what he's saying. He's saying, tighten up, especially if you're doing construction, because he's tired of the waste. I think we all are. $335 million for continual renovations on a cadet chapel is absolutely insane. And it's, it is really disrespectful to the cadets, to be totally honest. Like, this is, we have the greatest military in the world. It's an all-volunteer force, which is pretty rare. We can see in some of the other conflicts right now, there's a lot of people in this world who serve in a military fight in a war, and they didn't raise their right hand to be there. All of our service members did. And if you want to maintain that, you better give them a decent place to live, and you better give them a decent place to worship. I mean, these things are important. Where these cadets and, just talking about the service academies here, where they live and where they worship is crucial. Pete Hegseth came out, a couple days ago now, earlier this week, I think, saying he's putting together a total revamped task force for the barracks. And I completely agree. I mean, we have hundreds of billions of dollars to send to these other countries. We're pretty much paying the salaries of other countries' militaries during a government shutdown where our service members' salaries are in question. So we've got the money to do that. I think we can afford to make sure the greatest fighting force that humanity has ever known, comprised of solely volunteers who believe in what they're doing, I think we can afford to make sure they've got a decent place to live. But unfortunately, it's not in the best interest of these, generals who are or these colonels who are in garrison command. And then, they get a project in and they kind of hire and they're thinking about rolling up a few contracting companies when they get out. They got their little MBA. They got a buddy working over here, so they're going to kick him a contract, get a board seat on Raytheon, and just do the fucking North Virginia shuffle, dude. Like, that's the problem. And until we have somebody crawling up the ass of whatever that is, it's going to continue, unfortunately. So I really like what Pete Hegseth and President Trump are honing in on as far as like structures and buildings. I think that's great. I think that should continue. I wish that the Secretary of War didn't have to talk about barracks. Like, that seems like a first sergeant problem. That seems like a garrison command team problem. Like, we should be able to handle this at the installation level. These generals make how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year before they get any benefits, like health care for themselves, their families, all this stuff. They're going to get a really cushy retirement. Like, what are we paying you for? Like, we're not paying for you to come and stand on the back of a 240 range and watch, some private shoot a couple bursts and then get back in your 12 packs van and drive off without firing a single round because you probably couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. We're not paying you to do that. We have platoon sergeants who can go out there and monitor training, right? We have first sergeants who can talk about height and weight standards. We have command sergeants major who can come in and talk about how often we're going to be taking PT tests. What's the standard we're going to hold ourselves to? What's the accountability look like? We general officers, we need to expect more of these guys because, logistics matters. And if we can't do logistics, if we can't do housing properly in garrison with nobody shooting at us, I'm just like, what are we going to do later? But yeah, so speaking of which, you might not be able to pick who your garrison commander is, but you can pick who your mayor is and who's on your school board, because in 32 states all across the country this fall, it's municipal elections. So, yeah, municipal elections, that's all the local stuff. I was thinking about this as a service member, as a former service member. My husband's still in, okay? He doesn't claim residency in North Carolina. He claims it in Wisconsin, where he's from. The tax situation is much better in Wisconsin, and he hasn't really had a reason to change it to North Carolina. That's pretty much it. I claim North Carolina, but my family's from here. And I was thinking about that, and so many people in the military have very different views in the Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, North Carolina area, have very different views than the municipal government. I mean, I served on a city council committee. It was an awful experience, just because there was, people talk about diversity. Everyone on that committee looked exactly the same. They definitely didn't look like me, and they definitely didn't want to hear anything that I had to say. So it was not a fun experience. So I got kicked off for skipping too many meetings because I just stopped going, to be totally honest. But so I've seen the inside of the Fayetteville, Cumberland County municipal government, and I think a lot of people who live in Cumberland County who are in the military would not be very happy with the composition, the views, the absolute echo chamber that this becomes in Cumberland County's municipal government. And when all of the service members are residents of whatever state their home of record is in, they're not gonna be able to vote in their local area. And I understand why people stay a resident of their hometown, their home of record. It's usually a tax-related thing. If you get stationed in California, that's not your fault. The government sent you there. You shouldn't have to pay California state taxes, because the government sent you there. So then you can claim your home of record. But you have to think about, like, you know, as you kind of climb up in the ranks and then you got kids and then your kids start going to school, you know, if you stay a resident of your hometown and you don't switch to where you currently are, you don't get any say of the school board or who goes on the school board of the school that your kids are currently attending. So there's more than tax considerations if you're in the military and you're trying to figure out like where you want to be a resident of, like where you want to claim residency, especially if you have school-age children. I think it's really crucial. But that being said, there's also retirement considerations. So like if you're 2-3 years from getting out or retiring, you know, you have to think about where you're going to end up. And maybe you're going back to your hometown. So you want to start shaping what the school board's going to look like before you pick your family up and bring them back to, you know, Bruce, Wisconsin, or like wherever. So it's an interesting problem set for the military, trying to figure out who to or where to vote. But I am wholeheartedly against early voting. And I used to not be, but I'll tell you why. You shouldn't early vote. And I think we're seeing this in Virginia. There's a race going on in Virginia where one of the candidates had a text message exchange leak, and it was absolutely disgusting. It was horrible. Unfortunately, for anyone who doesn't like what he said and thinks that maybe the top law enforcement officer in the state like shouldn't be speaking that way, they might have already voted because early vote had started 45 days out. So this early voting thing, it's not in the best interest of the voters. It's in the best interest of the candidates, so that you want people to vote before they have all the information. That way there's no October surprise, so to speak. So yeah, I would say that if you, number one, vote in your municipal election. I don't care if it's early, mail-in, whatever, as long as it's legal, like vote in your municipal election. If you have time and can fit it into your schedule to vote like literally on election day so that you have the most amount of information possible about these people before you go in, I would encourage you to do that. I think millennials need to start taking a way bigger chunk of the responsibility for like voting, because we're the ones raising families in these communities. Like boomers go to the polls all the time. Our parents go to the polls all the time, and that's great. But we're kind of coming into that point of our life where we have a seriously vested interest. Like we have school-age children. We own homes in this community. We're usually like either in the kind of more metropolitan areas because that's where we work, or we're just outside. We're not like all the way in the country where nothing matters to us, like doesn't affect us. Like we're right there. So like Fayetteville, North Carolina, you know, the police chief, that matters to me. That's important to me. That's where I live. You know what I mean? So like the mayor matters. The school boards, I'm planning on homeschooling, so it doesn't matter as much to me, but I'm still going to make sure that like in the event that I do end up having to send Johnny to public school, you know, we've got a school, at least I've done my part to put a school board in place that's not going to have any crazy stuff going on, if you know what I mean. So that is how I feel about early voting. And speaking of municipal elections, we're going to wrap up with Mum Donnie up in New York running for mayor. I think there's 3 political positions, I think, 4. We'll call it 4. 4 political positions that I would say are like the top hitters. Number 1 is President of the United States. Duh. Number 2, I would say the governor of California. Mostly because the GDP of California is just so high and all the ports and all that stuff, like who that person is matters for the American economy. Silicon Valley's up there, all that stuff. I would say the governor of Texas, and then the mayor of New York. The governor of New York, nobody cares who you are. The mayor matters. I think the mayor in New York is probably the one mayor where people actually know who that guy is. And so you got the mayor in New York. I watched the debate. I watched some clips. This dude is incredibly well-spoken. He went on Fox, gave a great interview. I violently disagree with the vast majority of his views. And I don't think that he's genuine, because he wants to do things like keep everybody from owning property, but like he owns property. And, you know, he wants rich people to pay all these taxes. His family's pretty affluent. He lives in a rent-controlled apartment. So, like, You're living off the system when you don't have to. So I don't see this guy as particularly genuine. But when you want to ask yourself why people in New York City are voting for a socialist candidate, I was on here yesterday. I was saying that the answer to the problems of capitalism is more capitalism. Capitalism has problems when the government tries to put their thumb on the scale. Take all that crap off. More capitalism solves the problem. Let the private sector innovate. Let them do their thing. Let them build. Let them sell. You know what I mean? You're going to have some regulation here and there. I got it. But the answer to the problems of capitalism is generally not more regulation. But people don't agree. And they're seeing capitalism start to fail them, or they feel that capitalism is failing them. They were told, go get your college degree or else you're a loser. You can't afford it. That's fine. Here's a student loan. Just sign on the line. Get your parents to sign it. Worry about it later. And then, you got the gender studies degree who's paying the same amount as the chemical engineering degree. This guy's making this much. This guy's making nothing. And essentially the tuition of the gender studies degree guy kind of subsidized the engineering major because they're paying the same amount. And you can say it's a bad investment. You can say whatever. Sometimes buying a house that's too big is a bad investment. I was talking to my dad about this today, and the point I made, he doesn't agree with me on this, by the way. The point I made was most 18-year-olds can't buy a house. Like, the bank's not just going to give them a loan to go buy a $300,000 house, but they will give them a loan to go get a $300,000 education. It's interesting. And so they do that. They realize they're wrong. And luckily Gen Z is not falling for the same trap that like my generation fell for. They realize they're wrong. They're trying to work their way out of it. Maybe they're making $100,000 a year working in New York City, but they live in a shoebox. They can barely get by every month. They can't save enough money to get out of the city and get a house. And they don't want to have a kid in a shoebox apartment in the middle of the city where it's dangerous. So I get it, and they're frustrated. And they feel like they were led down the wrong path by greedy people who want all of their money. And so they start to lean towards socialism. And if you just put your empathy hat on for 2 seconds, you can understand why that's happening. You can disagree with some of the assumptions or some of the premises, but you can understand how that thought leads you to, well, capitalism must not work because look what it did to me. So they look at the socialism guy and they're like, man, he's making some nice promises. It's like the student council kid that said like, oh, we're going to have couches and candy in all the classrooms and I'm going to abolish homework. Yeah, it sounds great. It's not going to happen. And that's why I'm not stressed out about the Mamdani guy in the short term because he needs Albany to enact a lot of these policies. He's just going to go around and flounder. And if anything, these New Yorkers, these elder millennials in New York are going to see that socialism is not the answer to their problems. Getting out of New York City is probably the answer to your problems. Go find a job in, I don't know, North Dakota. I'm sure land's super cheap up there. You know what I mean? Just get out of the city, But they don't want to. So whatever. But yeah, they'll see that these socialist policies don't work. Maybe they'll blame the governor, the state, the federal government, maybe not. We just don't want. So you know how everybody told Trump supporters back in 2016 that they were stupid, called them deplorables. Hillary Clinton was famous for saying that. Everybody thought it was just these dumb, uneducated white men voting for Trump, and they're just stupid. Okay, well, you can write people off as stupid to your own peril when you lose an election. And so I think people are seeing this again in New York. It's just on the other side. It's not the young, or it's not the Republican, working class, blue collar white guy. It's the city dwelling, college educated liberal, who everybody's saying they're so stupid for taking those student loans. They're so stupid for living in New York City. They're so stupid for getting or electing a socialist guy. Don't write them off as being stupid. Understand where they're coming from and present an argument. Present a better option. You have to address, like conservative candidates need to figure out how to address these people. And like Charlie Kirk was doing that on college campuses. He was addressing the concerns of young people who were just starting to enter the workforce and just starting to kind of shoulder the responsibility of adulthood, who had a desire to own a home, to start a family, to do all these things. He was good at addressing that, and we need to continue that. Like, the conservative movement needs to continue addressing the concerns of these people, because if not, we're just going to keep losing elections to socialists, and then we're going to find ourselves in a country that we don't recognize. So with that in mind, we're going to pray for New York City today, and I got to get out of here, but Christ is King. Thanks for joining us for Pre-Launch 4, and I'll see you next time.